The air was thick with the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and something darker, something that clung to my skin like a whispered secret. I can still feel the weight of that moment, the way her breath grazed my neck, hot and unsteady, as our bodies pressed closer than they ever should have. My hands trembled, caught between hesitation and hunger, tracing the curve of her spine through the thin fabric of her dress. Clara. The name alone was a spark, igniting a fire I didn't know I could feel. She was my neighbor, older by a decade, with eyes that held stories I was too young to understand, and a laugh that unraveled me. In my room, on that sweltering afternoon, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only her, only us, and the reckless rhythm of our pulses colliding. It started innocently enough, or so I told myself. We'd been playing a game, some silly card match on my bed, her teasing me about my clumsy shuffles, her fingers brushing mine as she dealt. Clara always dressed like she was daring the world to look. Loose blouses that slipped off one shoulder, skirts that danced around her thighs. I was 18, all raw edges and restless longing, and she was a flame I couldn't stop reaching for. That day, her laughter softened into something else, a low hum that pulled me in. She leaned closer, her lips parting, and before I could think, her mouth was on mine. The kiss was a storm, fierce and consuming, drowning out the voice in my head that screamed this was wrong. Her hands were everywhere, guiding mine, peeling away the layers of my restraint. The bed creaked beneath us, a quiet protest to the weight of our choices. My shirt was gone, then hers, and the heat of her skin against mine was a revelation. Every touch was a confession, every sigh a sin. I remember the way her hair spilled across my pillow, dark waves framing the flush of her cheeks. Her body moved with a rhythm that felt ancient, instinctive, and I was helpless to do anything but follow. The world narrowed to the slide of her thighs, the arch of her back, the way her breath hitched when my lips found the hollow of her throat. It was too much, too fast, and yet not enough. I wanted to consume her, to be consumed, to burn until there was nothing left. But even in that haze, guilt was a shadow, creeping in with every heartbeat. She was married. Her husband, Tom, was a quiet man who mowed their lawn every Sunday, who waved at me when I passed by. I saw his face in my mind, fleeting but sharp, as Clara's fingers tightened in my hair. This was betrayal, a violation of trust I couldn't justify. Yet the ache in me, the desperate need to be seen, to be wanted, overpowered it all. I'd grown up in a house too big and too empty, my parents' voices always distant, their attention elsewhere. Clara's gaze, her touch, filled a void I hadn't named. She made me feel alive, electric, even as I knew we were crossing a line we could never uncross. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets, our breaths ragged, the silence heavy with what we'd done. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw regret flicker there. But then she smiled, soft and secretive, and kissed me again, slower this time, like she was sealing a pact. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but her hands were already moving, pulling me back into the fire. I wanted to stop, to say something, anything, to make sense of the chaos in my chest. But the words wouldn't come. All I could do was surrender, again and again, to the heat of her, to the thrill of being wanted. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments. She'd come over when Tom was at work, her knocks on my door a code I learned to crave. Each time it was the same, laughter turning to whispers, games dissolving into something darker. My room became our sanctuary, the only place where the world couldn't judge us. But the guilt grew heavier, a stone lodged in my chest. I'd catch myself staring at Tom's car in their driveway, imagining him finding out, imagining the hurt in his eyes. I'd lie awake at night, replaying every touch, every sigh, torn between ecstasy and shame. Clara was a drug, and I was addicted, knowing full well the poison was in the dose. I tried to rationalize it. She was unhappy, I told myself. Tom didn't see her, didn't cherish her the way I did. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. I was no savior, just a boy drowning in his own desires, too weak to pull away. Every time I swore it would be the last, she'd appear, her smile a lure, her touch a promise, and I'd fall again. The thrill was in the danger, in the secrecy, in the way we danced on the edge of ruin. But the higher we climbed, the further there was to fall, and I could feel the ground crumbling beneath us. The summer heat pressed against my window, a relentless accomplice to the fever that consumed me. Clara's visits became a rhythm, a pulse that dictated my days. Each knock on my door was a spark, setting my nerves alight with anticipation. She'd slip inside, her eyes glinting with that familiar mischief, and the world would shrink to the space between us. The games we once played, cards, banter, innocent teases, were gone, replaced by a hunger that grew bolder with every encounter. My room, once a refuge of boyhood clutter, was now a stage for our transgressions, the air thick with the scent of her skin and the weight of our secrets. Her touch was a language I'd learned by heart. The way her fingers traced the line of my jaw, slow and deliberate, like she was memorizing me. The soft collision of her breath against my ear, warm and teasing, as she whispered things that made my pulse race. Each time we came together, it was more reckless, more desperate, as if we were racing against an invisible clock. The bed groaned under our weight, the sheets twisting into knots as our bodies found a rhythm that was both fierce and fragile. Her skin was a furnace, burning against mine, and every movement was a confession of need, of shame, of something deeper I couldn't name. I'd lose myself in the curve of her hips, the shudder of her sighs, the way her nails dug into my shoulders like she was anchoring herself to me. One afternoon, she came to me in a dress so thin it was barely there, the fabric clinging to her like a second skin. The sunlight streaming through my window caught her silhouette, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She laughed at my stunned expression, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver through me, and then she was in my arms, her lips crashing into mine. We stumbled to the bed, a tangle of limbs and urgency, and the world dissolved into heat and motion. Her hands guided mine, bolder now, urging me to explore places we'd only dared to skim before. The air was heavy with our gasps, the rhythm of our bodies sinking in a dance that felt both sacred and profane. Every touch was a spark, every sigh a flame, and I was consumed, willingly, recklessly, by the fire we'd ignited. But the guilt was a shadow that never left. It lingered in the quiet moments, when our breaths slowed and the reality of what we'd done settled over us like dust. I'd lie there, her head on my chest, and feel the weight of Tom's name in my mind. He was a ghost in our stolen moments, his absence a silent accusation. I'd see Clara glance at her phone, her expression tightening, and know she was thinking of him too. "We're awful," she'd murmur once, her voice soft but heavy, and I'd nod, unable to speak. Yet the next day she'd be back, and I'd open the door, knowing full well I was damning us both. The thrill was in the danger, in the way we pushed further each time. One evening, she stayed longer than usual. the sky outside bruising into dusk. We were reckless, our laughter too loud, our touches too brazen. She pressed herself against me, her lips trailing fire down my neck, and I forgot to listen for the sound of Tom's car. The risk made it electric, the fear of being caught sharpening every sensation. Her body moved with a confidence that unraveled me, her whispers urging me to match her boldness. The world narrowed to the heat of her, the pulse of her, the way she trembled when I found the rhythm she craved. It was intoxicating, addictive, and I hated myself for how much I loved it. The shame grew heavier with each encounter. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror, see the flush of my cheeks, the disarray of my hair, and feel a stranger staring back. Who was I becoming? A boy who betrayed a man who'd done him no wrong, who chased fleeting pleasure at the cost of his soul. I'd think of my parents, their cold distance, their absence, and wonder if this was my rebellion, a desperate grasp for connection, for someone to see me. Clara did. She saw me in a way no one else ever had, and that was the hook that kept me tethered, even as I knew it was wrong. I tried to pull back once. I told her we should stop, my voice shaking as I stood by the door, refusing to let her in. Her eyes softened, and she touched my cheek, her fingers gentle but searing. "You don't mean that," she said, and she was right. I let her in, let her pull me back into the fire, because the alternative, the emptiness, the loneliness, was unbearable. Each time I swore it would be the last, but her touch was a siren's call, and I was too weak to resist. The summer stretched on, and our secret grew heavier, a weight we carried in stolen glances and hurried goodbyes. I'd watch her leave, her silhouette fading into the twilight, and feel the ache of her absence mingle with the dread of what we were doing. The thrill was still there, but it was laced with fear now, fear of being caught, fear of what I was becoming, fear that I'd never be able to stop. The air in my room felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were closing in, trapping the echo of our sins. Clara's visits were no longer just a spark. They were a wildfire, consuming every rational thought, leaving only ash and craving in their wake. Each time she slipped through my door, her eyes held a challenge, daring me to meet her in the reckless dance we'd perfected. And I did, every time, because the alternative, facing the void of her absence, was a darkness I couldn't bear. But the weight of our secret was crushing me, a stone in my chest that grew sharper with every stolen moment. Her touch had become a language of its own, fluent and unrelenting. The way her fingers wove through mine, pulling me closer until the heat of her body drowned out the world. The soft curve of her lips against my collarbone, each kiss a pulse that set my blood racing. We'd collapse onto the bed, the familiar creak of the frame a prelude to the rhythm we'd find. Her breath was a tide, rising and falling, hot against my skin as she moved with me. Her body a map I'd memorized, but could never fully chart. The slide of her thighs, the arch of her spine, the way her sighs broke into shudders. It was a symphony of need, and I was lost in its cadence. Every encounter was bolder, more desperate, as if we were trying to outrun the guilt that stalked us. One night, she came to me in the rain, her hair plastered to her face, her dress clinging to her like a second skin. The storm outside roared, but it was nothing compared to the tempest we unleashed. She pressed herself against me, her hands urgent, her lips fierce, and we stumbled into the dark of my room. The thunder masked our gasps, the lightning casting her in fleeting electric glows. Her skin was cool from the rain, warming under my touch, and every movement was a collision, fierce, frantic, as if we could burn away the wrongness of it all. Her whispers were a litany, urging me deeper into the fire, and I followed, helpless, addicted to the way she made me feel alive. But the guilt was a blade now, slicing through the haze. I'd lie awake after she left, her scent still lingering on my sheets, and see Tom's face in my mind, his quiet smile, his unassuming wave. He didn't deserve this. Neither did I. But I was the one choosing it, over and over. I'd think of Clara's ring, the glint of it catching the light as her hand moved over me, and feel a sickness twist in my gut. I was betraying a man who'd done nothing but exist, and worse, I was betraying myself. The boy I'd been, awkward, hopeful, lonely, was slipping away, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who chased fleeting pleasure at the cost of everything else. I tried to end it, more than once. One afternoon, I met her at the door, my resolve steeled, and told her we couldn't keep doing this. My voice cracked, betraying the war inside me. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought she'd agree, that she'd see the ruin we were heading toward. But then she stepped closer, her hand resting on my chest, her touch a quiet command. "You don't want to stop," she said, her voice low, certain, and damn her, she was right. I let her in, let her unravel me again, because the loneliness waiting on the other side was a chasm I couldn't face. Her body was a refuge, her sighs a reprieve, and I clung to them like a drowning man to driftwood. The fear of being caught was a constant now, a shadow that followed every touch. I'd flinch at the sound of a car engine, my heart racing as I checked the window for Tom's truck. Clara was bolder, careless even, lingering longer, laughing louder, as if tempting fate. Once, she kissed me in the hallway, her lips fierce against mine, just steps from the open window. I pulled away, my pulse hammering, but she only smiled, her eyes gleaming with that dangerous spark. The thrill of the risk was part of it for her, I realized, and that scared me more than anything. I was in too deep, and she was pulling me deeper still. The conflict inside me was a storm, tearing me apart. I'd sit alone in my room, the silence deafening, and try to imagine a life without her. But the thought of her absence was a physical ache, a hollowness I couldn't endure. I'd grown up invisible, ignored by parents too busy with their own lives, and Clara's attention, her gaze, her touch, was the only thing that made me feel real. Yet every moment with her was a step toward ruin, a betrayal of trust, of morality, of the person I wanted to be. I was trapped, caught between the ecstasy of her and the agony of what we were doing. By the end of that month, I was a wreck, my days a blur of longing and dread. I'd see Clara in my dreams, her body entwined with mine, only to wake with a start, the shame crashing over me like a wave. I wanted to stop, to save us both. But the pull of her was too strong, the fire too bright. And so I kept opening the door, kept falling, knowing full well the flames would consume us. The summer was fading, the air growing sharp with the promise of autumn, but the heat between us burned hotter than ever. Clara's presence was a constant now, her shadow lingering in my room even when she wasn't there. The walls seemed to hum with the memory of our touches, the bed a silent witness to the lines we'd crossed. Each encounter was a descent, deeper and more reckless, as if we were daring the universe to notice. Her hands were bolder, her whispers fiercer, and I followed her into the fire, knowing it would burn us both, but too weak to pull away. The thrill was laced with terror now, the fear of discovery a pulse that never stopped. One evening she came to me late, the sky outside a bruise of purples and blacks. Her eyes were wild, her breath quick, as if she'd run to me through some unseen storm. She didn't speak, just pressed herself against me, her lips fierce and urgent. We stumbled to the bed, the familiar rhythm igniting instantly, our bodies colliding with a desperation that felt final. Her skin was a fever against mine, her sighs a tide pulling me under. The world narrowed to the slide of her body, the shudder of her breath, the way her fingers clung to me like she was afraid I'd vanish. It was reckless, raw, a dance on the edge of ruin, and I let myself drown in it, chasing the fleeting ecstasy that made the guilt bearable. But the guilt was a beast now, clawing at me even in the height of passion. I'd see Tom's face in my mind, his quiet kindness a rebuke to the betrayal we were weaving. Clara's ring glinted in the dim light, a reminder of the vows we were shattering. I hated myself for it, for the way I craved her despite the cost, for the way I let her pull me back every time I tried to break free. Yet her touch was a lifeline, the only thing tethering me to a world that had always felt too vast, too empty. I was a boy starving for connection, and she was the only one who'd ever seen me. The cracks in our secret began to show. Tom started coming home earlier, his truck rumbling into the driveway at unpredictable hours. I'd freeze at the sound, my heart hammering as Clara dressed in a hurry, her laughter tinged with nerves. Once, he knocked on my door minutes after she'd left, asking if I'd seen her, his voice calm, but his eyes searching. I lied, my voice steady despite the panic clawing at my throat, and he nodded, oblivious to the truth written in the flush of my skin. The close call left me shaken, the reality of our recklessness crashing over me. We were playing with fire, and the flames were closing in. I tried to end it again, my resolve hardened by the fear of being caught. I met Clara at the door, my words rehearsed, and told her it was over. "We're destroying everything," I said, my voice raw. Her face softened, and for a moment I thought she'd agree. But then she stepped closer, her hand brushing my cheek, her eyes locking onto mine. "You need me," she whispered, and the truth in her words broke me. I did need her. Her attention, her touch, the way she filled the emptiness I'd carried for years. I let her in, let her unravel me again, because the alternative was a loneliness I couldn't face. The final straw came on a quiet afternoon, the kind of day that felt too ordinary for the chaos it would unleash. Clara was in my room, her body pressed against mine, our breaths sinking in that familiar rhythm. The world was a haze of heat and motion, her sighs a melody I'd memorized. But then I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel, too close, too soon. Tom's truck. Panic surged through me, sharp and cold, as Clara froze, her eyes wide. We scrambled, her dress slipping through her fingers, my hands shaking as I shoved her toward the back door. She was gone in seconds, a shadow vanishing into the yard, but the damage was done. Tom knocked, his voice calling my name, and when I opened the door, his eyes narrowed, catching the disarray of my room, the flush of my face. He didn't accuse me, not directly, but the suspicion was there, a weight in his gaze. "Clara was here, wasn't she?" he asked, his voice low. I lied again, but the words felt hollow, and his silence was worse than any shout. He left without another word, and I collapsed, the reality of our betrayal crashing over me. The secret was no longer ours. It was a bomb, ticking, ready to destroy everything. That night, I sat alone, the silence deafening. I thought of Clara, of the fire we'd built, and felt the full weight of what I'd done. I'd betrayed a man who'd done me no wrong, betrayed myself, all for a fleeting thrill that left me emptier than before. The loneliness I'd feared was here now, sharper than ever, because I'd lost the boy I'd been. I wanted to run to her, to beg her to make it right, but I knew the truth. There was no fixing this. The only choice was to face the consequences, to own the ruin I'd helped create. The next morning, I saw Clara in her yard, her eyes meeting mine across the fence. There was no smile, no spark, just a quiet sorrow that mirrored my own. I turned away, my chest tight, knowing I had to let her go. The fire had burned out, and all that was left was ash.